We are without Bob today, so if you're a fan of Bob, I'm sorry. If you're not a fan of Bob, then this is the show for you. Today we'll be discussing how Microsoft is making its Windows Recall feature opt-in and securing the data with Windows Hello to address privacy concerns. We'll discuss Snowflake, a cloud storage provider that's disclosed a breach where hackers have accessed customer accounts using stolen credentials. And this has impacted large companies like Ticketmaster and Santander, and many others have been rolling out in the last 24 hours, actually. And Microsoft has announced plans to phase out NTLM application or authentication protocol in favor of the more secure Kerberos. So we'll be kind of diving into this, what it means, what it doesn't mean, and how to prepare. So first off, good morning, happy Patch Tuesday. And we will go around and do some introductions, and I will start with Hemija. Hemija, good morning.
Morning, Glenn.
How was your weekend? Anything
It was
exciting?
amazing. I went kayaking
Ooh, love it. Nice.
and I'm still here. So that's my
And you're still,
accomplishment.
is this like your first kayaking experience, or is this a thing that
I've
you do?
it's my first kayaking experience where I did not have to be rescued.
Oh, okay. I feel like that's a follow-up conversation for later. Like helicopter rescue or just like crawl to the shore and get back on the boat?
Like
Oh,
other kayaks
drama.
coming out to rescue me.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're gonna have to find out more about that later. So in Bob fashion, because we're gonna do some of the stuff Bob does, but not all of it, because we like to create chaos when he's not in. Icebreaker question: what is your Harry Potter house?
I am a Slytherin through and through. I remember trying to take that quiz like several times to get different results with different answers. Always Slytherin.
Yeah, I get it. All right, we will. Emily, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Glenn.
How was your weekend?
It was a weekend. It was a weekend. It was
Okay,
good. It's
great.
getting toasty here in Atlanta, so
Were
that's
you?
fun.
Did you too not require rescuing?
Luckily, I did not. I made it home
Great.
safely from a long run and was good. Just very
Great.
overheated.
2 for 2 for not being rescued. Love it. What is
Success.
your Harry Potter house?
So I actually didn't know, and I outsourced this answer to my partner,
Great.
and he said Hufflepuff, which then I read the descriptions of the houses, and I was like, I don't. Okay, that's optimistic. I'm glad that's what you think. So I'm gonna roll with that. I'm gonna just go with that and say Hufflepuff. I don't. Yeah,
I,
Hufflepuff.
I feel like that's a good appearance that you want to have.
Sure, exactly. I'm gonna just go
A
with it.
good way to be seen,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Next, so we have our special guest, Patrick from Vuln Check. Welcome, Patrick.
What's up?
Good morning. How was your weekend?
It was great. I went fishing.
You went fishing? Yeah.
Yeah,
Did the
no
fish
kayak,
need
but
rescuing, or did you need rescuing?
no, it's some
Great.
fun. It
Love
was
it.
good. They
Great.
like dumped a bunch of trout for a kids thing by our house, so we got to like catch some trout.
Just
So
like
it
on
was
the street,
fun.
or what?
There's like a little park by our house, and they like
Okay,
set
so they
up
were in the water.
fences,
Okay.
and they dumped like 800 in the water, and you just fish and catch them. It was fun. Kids liked it.
You do you keep it and eat it, or is it like catch and release and
Yeah,
restuff?
no,
Yeah.
you
What?
keep them. Yeah.
Okay. All
So it
right.
was it was fun,
Awesome.
unique experience for the kids. Like catch your
Interesting.
food.
Yeah. Do you do the whole thing? You fillet and cook and all that?
Yeah, yeah, it was fun.
Okay. All right. I've
Yeah.
never filleted a
No one
fish.
wanted to eat it except me.
I
It
won't do
was
that.
delicious.
I don't want to fillet a fish.
Uh,
So Patrick literally went fishing. Got it. Great. So, what's your Harry Potter house?
oh man, I'm realizing I should ask my daughter. She's like a big Harry Potter fan. I don't know. Like is like Gryffindor, is that
Gryffindor
a
is one.
house?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. We'll say that.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Uh,
Yeah, I did the official quiz ages ago, and same as him and Joe, I got Slytherin, and I was like, no, and then I got Slytherin, and then I just kind of leaned into it because, like, you know what, we're kind of sly and we get stuff done, so hey, we'll take it.
Sweet.
Um, awesome. Well, so as you noticed, and we talked about Patrick. Oh my gosh, see Ashley, I knew she'd do this to me. Actually, I did that on purpose. So, Ashley gives me a hard time because I always skip her or miss her, so I had to do it on purpose. Ashley took 2 different tests and both said Ravenclaw. I don't actually hear that a lot. Wit and wisdom. I agree. I agree. That's funny. So Ashley is Overwatch. She's the one that makes all this happen in the background, which is why I always joke that we forget about her. So she does too good of a job. So yes, Patrick with Volncheck. Welcome aboard. Let's see some comments.
Thanks.
Also, feel free to comment, join in the conversation, heckle, ask questions. We see them. Sometimes they have names, sometimes they don't. But we'll respond to those as we can. So yeah, so Patrick, what you been up to? You joined Volncheck in the recent past, and you've been up to some cool research. What's going on?
Yeah. Joined in January, and working on a bunch of vuln research. So I've been doing that a while. And I know we're talking about some other things like NTLM and MFA with Snowflake, which is highly relevant. I spent 8 years at Duo Security as well. And then I'll talk about some things. Spent a couple years at Blumira doing SIM detection and response stuff. So super relevant like topics right now as far as things going on in the industry, which
Yeah.
I find really interesting and fun.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing for me are like I've been working on some trends analysis of known exploited vulnerabilities for May,
Mhm.
and then sysavul enrichment. So I can talk about those things if that's cool.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I think a few weeks ago we kind of chatted a little bit about vuln enrichment initiative that CISA's working on, especially with all of the NVD drama going on and uncertainties. And so, there's a lot of scramble to fill the void, and that's creating interesting scenarios for practitioners to keep up with the vulns and what's real, what's the official source of truth and such. So would love to hear about like what you found from May and what your own Kev, the Patrick Kev is looking like.
Yeah, so I mean, May definitely a big uptrend, and we're releasing a blog post on Thursday with like much more detail on this, right? But I'm always looking at known exploitation. That's like a big portion of where I'm researching day to day. And the interesting thing is for May, like pretty considerable uptrend as far as 103 known exploited vulnerabilities that there was someone that disclosed known exploitation for the first time that we found. And so that's a pretty significant amount. Usually, baselines are around 50 a month, 30,
Oh,
40, 50 a month,
okay.
right? And that's inclusive of SysACAV. So SysACAV, I think, is normally usually around like, I don't know, 15, 20 non-exploited vulnerabilities. But yeah, for me, it was more curiosity, like what's impacting a significant increase, um, what products are impacted. And so like it's not all new vulns, right? It's a lot of
Sure.
older
Yeah.
vulns, even with this. But yeah, the first thing I look at is kind of like, whoa, who actually reported and disclosed this? And if you look at that, it ties back to like more and more security vendors disclosing CVE known exploited vulnerabilities in their security reports.
Okay.
And the timing's interesting because RSA was in May. So you have large organizations like Fortinet. I think Checkpoint had a pretty significant, substantial blog post on known exploitation. And then there was Aqua Security had a report, and like these were filled with known exploited vulnerabilities they've seen that nobody has seen published before. So I think that like just the Fortinet report alone had 25 new known exploited vulnerabilities that people hadn't disclosed publicly before.
Interesting.
Yeah, so definitely
So
that
do we
was
think
a big
do we
portion of
think
the
this is like
contribution.
yeah, do we think this is maybe part of um to support the official Kev list, or is this to support getting more information out? Like, do we have any gut feelings on why
I,
organizations are being a little bit more specific about their CVEs and
Yeah,
their
I think
reports?
twofold. Like one is that I think people are like, hey, the more we can get out known exploitation and share this information, like the better that is for everybody.
Yeah.
So maybe like organizations aren't so much like let's keep our intelligence to ourselves.
Yeah.
And in our philosophy generally is like we're collecting intelligence. We're not trying to like limit the known exploited vulnerability intelligence to ourselves. And so the reality is like everyone. So yeah, I think there was like maybe 20 different sources disclosing known exploitation that we saw in May, and those will change. Those change every month, right?
Sure.
But generally speaking, one thing that I'm a big advocate for is like when you see known exploitation, like get it out there in the public and disclose so people know and they can actually action on it. So that's a general trend. And I also think that might tie to marketing initiatives where people are trying to get news, they're trying to get more visibility. Um, so I think there's some benefits from like a commercial perspective and being more liberal in disclosing known exploited vulnerabilities as well as far as collaboration across the security community. So for me, great signs like more visibility into exploitation evidence is a really good thing for people on the downstream side of things of having clear evidence from reputable sources of known exploitation, right?
So I'm curious, you briefly touched on this, kind of about how some of these are older, like known exploited vulnerabilities, or some of them are older, right? Like some of them are very old. And I'm curious if you have a sense of the vulnerable data versus SysACEV, like is the average age or kind of does that kind of seem the same, or do we see different kind of ages of vulnerabilities popping up in each? Because I find that whole phenomenon really fascinating. Like, how is a vulnerability
Yeah.
that's 10 years old, what is it still doing out there? Why have you not patched? And also, like, what is going on there?
Yeah, I mean, so I've been on both. Like, I'm on the Intel side, but then I've also been on the customer side, and I work a lot with large organizations and vulnerability programs, right, or vulnerability management programs. So, like, one reality is like there is not capacity to patch most things. There are a lot of things, and especially when you're talking about companies that have been around longer, it's really easy for a modern tech company to stay up to date. That's like cloud first, but it's really difficult for someone like a manufacturing or a hospital system or an energy, grid to maintain up to date software. Like you have components that it's just not realistic to update or stay up to date. And that's where
Sure,
mitigations come into play, right?
but for
But
real, like for something that's like 10 years old, like how much of
yeah.
that do we think is like they just don't have the
Yeah.
systems in place versus this is not a good situation?
Yeah, so I think like some of it is root cause analysis where it's like, yeah, this could be fundamentally a patch problem. Is part of that. But I do think there's a reality that it's like, yeah, there's legacy systems and many organizations and like rewriting code applications, right? And they're that they're relying on. Like these are major projects when you're talking about large enterprises. And so there's just a
Just
reality that it's like nobody planned for that tech debt. Nobody planned to do those rewrites. Nobody planned to upgrade those systems. And I know that sounds like I'm not trying to justify, right? But like that's part of what the industry overall needs to shift to across the world is organizations actually need to plan capacity to upgrade systems, fix
yeah.
systems, and move to more modern technology. Unfortunately, in many cases, that can cost tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars when you're talking about a huge manufacturing facility that none of the components were built to be upgraded. So yeah, I mean, it's part of the same thing with healthcare and what we're seeing there, right? It's just so difficult when you have an EMR system that's still running embedded Windows XP, to say like, oh, just update that.
I also wonder how much
Um,
is a visibility issue, or maybe like not maybe issue might not be the right word, but visibility, like gaining visibility into parts of infrastructure or parts of their network that they didn't have before, and then finding like, oh, we actually have this, 15-year-old system or this 20-year-old
yeah,
Windows NT system running over here. Or it's also, a lot of M&A happens where tiny company gets bought up and a tiny company is, literally hanging on by a thread. So there's a lot of scenarios, but that's where we talk about, over in our best practice which some people don't like that word, but whatever. Like in the like best practices for organizations is this constant monitoring, because yes, I know that you scanned your network yesterday or last week. However, it's different today. Like it's always a snapshot in time. It's not
Yeah.
this perpetual. It's very it's a living organism, right? Things come and go all the time. So you're gonna have to stay on top of it. And a lot of orgs still can't, unfortunately, scan more than, once a week or twice a week. I mean, twice a month. So
Yeah, and I think like a good example, like external exposure, census attack surface management, like yeah, that's a no-brainer. Everyone should be doing and upgrading externally exposed systems, right?
yeah,
Are they all doing that? I think the data shows like not necessarily. Like we have Windows still that has RDP promoted as a way to connect a remote desktop to your Windows box. Like yeah, maybe they shouldn't be promoting that to end users. That's a functionality because it's like shooting yourself in the foot.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah,
genuinely, I think it's like it is a lot about pruning your environment and starting to get rid of some of these technologies that are continually targeted. So I wish the reality was like see more people updating their systems across the board, but especially when you're looking at internal, like the data I've seen more recently, like there's a lot of progress to go, and I think initiatives like actually doing root cause analysis to understand why there's so much vulnerability debt is really really important as well, and understanding like where there are exploited vulnerabilities or where there's evidence of POCs, things of that nature as it
yeah.
relates to, so you can target and focus a little bit more.
So we have a good comment related to what you said, Patrick, from Justin, which is, understandable point, but they're customers, consumers, and uninvolved people that pay the real consequences for companies' bad or poor choices, so they can squeeze another penny out for their shareholders. And I think what he's referring to there is, your comment about companies need to allocate resourcing like time, money, et cetera, to keeping systems up to date, not just deploy and forget. But
Yeah.
again, all of this is a living, breathing organism essentially. So like it takes care and feeding. It's gonna take, when you're doing project management, you have to allow for 20% of times to be bug fixes and upgrades, et cetera, like that. So it's absolutely a great point.
Yeah, and
So what
focusing on
about
the right things as well, I think are really important there. Because even in the government side, it's like, yeah, they don't like they slate a project, they don't slate to upgrade those systems, and that's why CISA has come in and said, "Here's a bunch of money to go upgrade systems."
yeah.
At times is a good example. So
Himija, did I cut you off?
No, you didn't. I was just gonna, not to stray too far from this topic, but I was gonna say another thing that keeps me up at night in this space is supply chain vulnerabilities, right? Because that's like, okay, how do you prepare for that?
yeah,
And again, if we're talking about these organizations like healthcare organizations, right? How are they gonna know how to find this one tiny Apache module in their EMR system or in their, and like that, and then how do they go patch that? Like who does the onus lie upon? Because in all of these kind of like bigger recent breaches too, what I see is a lot of like finger pointing where it's like
yeah.
Yep.
company is like it should be on the user, and then users like what, we don't know what we're talking about right now, like what's going on? And I worry that the finger pointing is like really distracting
It's
us
like an
from the bigger
excuse.
problem.
Like there's been such an
Yeah.
increase in like I haven't looked like researched this, but gut says if you go back 3 or 5 years at data breaches, it was always kind of this like shameful, or probably 10 years now, like shameful, very non-transparent, like, oh, this thing happened and we're sorry and it won't happen again or whatever. And it's very mysterious. And now, of course, there's regulation. There's a lot of reasons why we're getting disclosures sooner, which is good. However, those disclosures also, which we'll talk about next, is like, yeah, we use Snowflake, go talk to them. And where and maybe this is a good transition into that topic, like where is that line of responsibility for, yes, sometimes third party breaches are not your fault, but you're still the person or the organization that customers chose to do business with, and you chose to do business with them. So like maybe it's not your fault, but it's still It's like when your flight is delayed because of weather, like, it's not the airline's fault, but it's still, like, their responsibility to try and get you where you were going.
Yeah, I think there are some responsibilities that vendors need to take more seriously. Like if you're building technology that can't be updated easily for long periods of time, like you might actually have to consider replaceable hardware modules so you can move to updated operating systems so these things can upgrade. Like maybe in
Yeah.
an EMR, you're not replacing like all the magnets and fun stuff, but like maybe the server is interchangeable. So now I can change from Windows XP to Windows 11 and that machine still operates and works. So when we are looking at the supply chain, like I do think that is a vendor responsibility. And we are talking about embedded systems, but you really have to rethink on how you're building and developing these systems. And I think ultimately, like the consumers need to hold them more accountable. Like, how are you going to make sure this system maintains updated and is secure for the life of the product that I'm going to actually use it? And there are some initiatives, I think, in Europe, for instance, that are moving more towards regulation around this that some people might like or not like. But generally speaking, I think like, yeah, fundamentally, like the supply chain aspect, especially when we're talking about like IoT embedded systems and all that stuff, is completely um, a wreck. And I love to say it's not, but like that's just the reality, and it's going to take
Yeah.
a decade plus. If you know, we really need to start taking this stuff a lot more seriously. And then I think it's like, well, yeah, and then a lot of these systems get connected online, so that's where where we're existing right now. Is it's like it's a really challenging problem to solve for, but
It's awesome to
ultimately,
have
like
40-year-old systems connected to the internet for the first time.
yeah, and I think same thing we're talking about Snowflake, like, yeah, like, why didn't Snowflake just implement, like, default requirements for MFA? Like, that should be the case with
Yeah.
any cloud service, right? So, um
Yeah, so I'm gonna pivot to that story. We'll do that story next. So a short summary, which by the way, there's no slides today. So if you're just listening, you're not missing out on anything visually. Um,
Just our
but
beautiful
so
faces.
just our beautiful face. Well, three of the four. We'll leave it at that. So yeah, so the Snowflake story we're talking about, basically the cloud analytics platform Snowflake has had a significant security incident involving unauthorized access to customer accounts. And the kind of the high points or the highlights of or lowlights of the situation are, what we know is threat actors have obtained login credentials, likely through some sort of malware they've been using to target customer accounts that did not have MFA, multi-factor authentication, enabled. um, it's affected multiple major companies such as Ticketmaster, Santander, Advanced Auto Parts, Lending Tree subsidiary, and even this morning, like, kind of put these notes together late yesterday, but this morning reading through the news, like, there's more, including it looks like Cylance might be affected. Like, these are kind of trickling out as the investigations go on. Cyber criminals have been on breach forums selling the stolen data, or at least claiming that it's from the Snowflake breach. And Snowflake is standing with their stance that there's no evidence of a breach of vulnerability in its own system, but that it's from compromised customer credentials, leaked some way, either malware or reused credentials. But they have been facing criticism for the lack of transparency as far as like what's going on with the investigation and this incident. And to Patrick's point that he was just hinting at, which is around MFA not being enforced or default for their customer accounts. And so far the response is they will enable or force enable MFA, but there's no timeline on that. So all that being said, we get back to the conversation of like, where is the line of responsibility? Where's the onus is on whom in this chain of events for companies doing business with a analytics platform like that. So what do we think?
If you do not use an analytics platform that out of the box has default MFA enabled, and you don't put it behind SSO or don't somehow enable MFA on your end, like that seems like a huge miss.
Are you victim blaming?
No, I'm saying that I think that's so I've worked in places that use Snowflake as a data lake, right? And you think about the things that go into any data lake, any kind of like major analytics platform, like that's the keys to the kingdom in a lot of cases. You have customer data, you have transaction data, you have all these types of things that are in there that you don't want getting out, right? And I think to have that kind of data, there is a responsibility that you as the operator have to properly secure that. And I think suggesting in 2024 or 2023 that, you know, one of the ways to do that in a very basic way is to enable SSO, is to enable MFA, to essentially not have these things just sitting out, right? I don't
Hey,
think that's
I'm gonna challenge you though.
can I just finish my statement
Yeah,
though?
sorry, go ahead.
So
Yeah.
I don't think that's a particularly like dramatic thing to say, but I am curious about what you want to challenge there.
Yeah, like, so my guess is most of these organizations have SSO and MFA enabled actually. So there's a perception they do, but fundamentally they probably didn't have MFA configured on the Snowflake account because you
Sure.
still have separate creds. So fundamentally for me, it's like, yeah, this is such a gap where like any SaaS software should be enabling secure by default MFA for login credentials. Well, if you messed up your SSO and you didn't implement MFA there, that's on you. But you know, my gut is with so many people impacted is like they had a perception of security that wasn't there. And should they be auditing like the base account? No doubt. But like we see this continue to happen over and over again. Same thing happened at Duo, and like same thing. There's still SMS two-factor authentication. There's better non-bypassable, you know, authentication credentials that are available, but people still continue to not use them. So ultimately, like the industry needs to come down and say, like, no, you have to actually implement and use this in order for these problems to start going away. And it's a pretty simple, like GitHub implemented MFA requirements for all users.
That's what I was going to bring up was have they fully implemented it, or was that like at least in the last 6, 9, 12 months that because there was the big, you know, so there was several supply chain incidents, unless I know time is weird in the last 4 years, so my timeline could be wrong. But anyway, there was not that long ago that, you know, there were supply chain attacks through GitHub, and I was floored to find out that MFA was not forced in that platform. So, you know, I think that we are, it's kind of like the, you know, well, it shouldn't have been an option for the last like 5, 8 years to implement MFA. But I'm wondering, like Emily, is your point kind of not necessarily that MFA wasn't enabled, but the fact that you're giving such data to a company that doesn't have it enabled by default as an indicator of the rest of their security practices? Is that kind of the
Yeah. So I think it's a little bit of both, right? Like
Okay.
Patrick, you could totally be right? Where this is a situation where like this was just something that was like a little bit of a miss on the company's
the
part.
local admin account was still enabled or
Sure.
something?
Right. So that totally could be. And yeah, I've seen discussion around Snowflake not requiring that for all of these instances, which I do think is a miss, right? But I think again, like I don't know, maybe this is sort of a depressing way to look at it, but like nobody's going to look out for you but you. Like as an organization, no,
It's a
and
lesson
actually I
in
think
life.
somebody just that right. Like you want to choose vendors who are following, who have the appearance of having, you know, good compliance with guidelines and best practices and what have you. But like at the end of the day, it falls on you. And I don't mean that in like a victim blamey way. I just mean like I think that's the reality of the world we live in, and that's sort of where things are.
Yeah, you're
I mean,
right. I think it's one of those things where it's like we're both right. Like Snowflake for their customers should be enabling secure defaults.
100%.
And this is actually a huge example where it's like something so basic as requiring MFA could have now eliminated 100 plus large enterprise breaches.
like this is probably, or
On
this is likely
Snowflake's
the most.
part. So like for me, it's like, yo, Snowflake, you should have done this a long time ago. Like that was the right thing to do. And you chose at some point you didn't take that as a priority. I think every SaaS company, we went through this with Azure. We went through this with GitHub. We're now going through it with Snowflake. There's probably 100 others. But we're going to see this the next decade. SaaS vendors not implementing MFA as a default. for the next 10 years, if we don't get some like change guidelines and industry standards to say this is not an opt-in capability, this is a mandate to use a SaaS platform.
It almost feels
Yeah,
like this weird, like twisted natural selection on both sides, vendor and customer, where like everyone has to get burned at least
that
once,
like
and once they're
Darwin.
burned,
Yeah,
yeah, and post like Darwinism, where like you have to get
yeah,
burned personally, and then you're like, oh, okay, I will change my
yeah,
ways.
for
Then you care
sure.
about
Like
it. Yeah.
it's a rite of passage, and I mean, isn't every security incident that way, right? Like organizations can't get funding that they need until the big bad thing happens, and then suddenly like the bank is open.
Never
So
let
there's
a
a good
crisis go to
discussion.
waste.
Exactly. There's a good discussion going on in the comments, Jason and Justin, and about MFA and how it's due diligence, and Justin has a point that we're all very familiar with, which is admins or organizations are more worried about the inconveniencing of users than making sure they're secure. And part of that, again, like I say this a million times a week, but every decision is a business decision. And that includes this, right? Like if you have 100 million users and you implement MFA, that's not easy. Like there's support cost and call, the phones are going to ring. Someone has to answer the phone. Like there's all this stuff. So like there are very complex decisions that have to be made that all have large dollar signs attached to it, but then it's still about doing the right thing, and we're, this is, not an anti-capitalism rant, but like it goes back to that, right? Where it's like, what's the cheapest thing? Like pay the problem whenever we have a breach, pay for the solution, or just like, do the right thing. And a lot of people just don't do the right thing. Or organizations, I mean. A lot of people too. Um All right, so we're gonna move on a little bit to the Windows recall story, mostly because like I think we just want to brag about it because I'm pretty sure it was all because of us. Like last week we went a little hard on Windows recall. I think we were the only ones. I don't think anyone else had opinions about it. I think it was just us. Isn't that right? I don't think there was any other. Yeah. So but anyway, so Windows Recall, if you recall, is the feature that's coming out in Windows 11, I think. Is it just Windows 11 or is it actually in the server too? I don't know. That would be scary if it's in the server. It's all scary. But essentially, it's just taking snapshots of your activity that's always there, always recording, and you can just play back your whole memory, your whole day in screenshots and stuff in a local database. Well, that raised an insane amount of concerns by the community, which is awesome. There's a lot of outspokenness. I was speaking in jest earlier. A lot of outspokenness about not loving this feature, how it was enabled by default. You had to actually disable it if you didn't want it. It does have some hardware requirements, which is going to be a pretty large gate at the beginning, at least. But yeah, originally it was on by default and stored in a local database that you could just access, like no big deal. So they've since walked back on that. They're going to make it opt-in, so that's helpful. And they're also going to secure it with the Windows Hello authentication in response to the privacy concerns and outspokenness about it. So those new enhanced security and privacy updates are coming out later this month, or about a week actually. So yeah, I think it's good that Microsoft was listening to what folks were pushing back about that. Still, I think Hemedja last week was questioning like who asked for this, and I still agree with that. Um, but nonetheless, at least there's some progress in that. I don't know if anyone else has some more commentary about it. I was just looking through the comments. Used to install something like recall non-productive employee computers. Okay. Yeah, there is a whole software industry, and that was kind of my wonder last week. There is like a whole industry around like monitoring employees or even students uh, on company assets, and I'm sure there's a time and place for that. It just feels weird. So, but as
Maybe it
always,
could
everyone should
be.
operate with no assumption of privacy on any machine, especially if you don't own it. But generally speaking, we're all screwed anyway, so it's fine. But if you don't own the machine, do not act like you have privacy. Yeah, Himija.
I was just thinking off the top of my head, maybe it could be useful for like creative fields where you forget to control S every 5 seconds, and you're like, oh my gosh, what was I
If you're
doing
still running
2 days
Office,
ago?
not like Cloud Docs, and you have to
Yeah,
like, yeah.
exactly. You're like in a cabin in the woods with no internet, for to conducive to productivity, and then you're writing like the novel of the century, and you're like, oh man, I hate this new. It's like Git basically for
Yeah.
creatives.
A version tracker. I did see I was reading the cybersecurity subreddit last night, as I do when I'm winding down, and there was a funny comment. Like there was a conversation about like, hey, how do you keep up with the industry? Because there's just so much, and I had the feeling that this is probably someone newer in the field, and then there was a lot of folks that were um, seemingly more experienced in the field saying like, basically, you don't keep up. You kind of find your niche, you focus on that. There's just too much. We can't keep up with it all. And you just gotta set that expectation with yourself. But what did make me LOL was there was a comment that said just I use Windows Recall to keep up with what I've already read for the day. And so I appreciated that humor. So whoever that random stranger was, I got your joke and I appreciated it.
Reading the description of Recall, I did have this thought where, like, so the whole selling point is like, find things you've seen with Windows Recall. And I did have this thought of like, I don't know if this happens to anybody else, but like when you're investigating something, like you're in the middle of like a threat research investigation and you're just like down a rabbit hole and you're like trying to take notes, but you also are just like kind of in the zone and you sort of have that like blackout moment where you like don't remember anything. You don't know how you got there. Like you need a minute to like piece things back together. And I was like, this would actually be useful in that scenario in a very weird way, although I would never want it enabled on any machines I own. But like in theory, I could see that being kind of helpful because I suffer from that. Like, oh
Yeah,
my
that's
God,
valid.
I pivoted many times and don't know how I got here. So,
Yeah. But
but
then
mm,
you have to have some sort of way to summarize that because
yeah,
then you just replay your whole day and you're just like, what was I doing? Like it turns into
yeah,
like
that could get really
50
depressing.
First Dates or whatever the movie was, where you're just doing the same thing over and over.
Groundhog Day.
Yeah,
Do
gotcha.
you do y'all really think that like just making this an opt-in feature is enough? Because in my book, I'm like,
No.
I'm never touching a Windows machine
It's
again.
helpful. It's better than
And I don't.
default. We're taking
Yeah, I
small
don't
wins
use
This was
here.
an
Windows,
easy
but
win for them, I think. This was an easy like PR and marketing win for Microsoft to go, okay, wait a minute, hold on. We messed up. We're gonna actually make this opt-in. This was an easy lever to pull, but I don't think it actually changes
like,
the heaviness of what this is.
but what we're saying here is it's like, hey, we're okay with you still embedding this in every single device that has Windows, right?
Yeah.
As an opt-in.
Right.
And I do like I've seen some heavy opinions on this. It's like it's still spyware. Like you're not gonna know what people are watching and doing and collecting in the information. And I think there's a lot of scenarios where like this thing gets enabled, you don't know it.
It'll be part
Now
of
there's
some
just a
malware info stealer campaign, right? Is to enable
Absolutely.
like my
yeah,
only
not good.
happiness right now is that it's very hardware specific. So I'm like, okay, great, we have a couple of years. But then what, right? Even if like Windows Hello, which I'm not intimately familiar with, but at the surface level, I know that you can unlock Windows Hello with a 4-digit PIN if you haven't configured differently, like whatever. Um, so there's a lot of still very concerning things. Like I would never enable this. I don't want it. Like I would rather troll through my internet history on my browser to figure out, kind of what Emily was talking about. But I don't know. Like there's a reason, it's a business decision. Like I said earlier, there's a reason. So maybe they just needed it for their own employees, and they're like, we can just sell this. I don't. All right. So the next story that we have, actually, sorry, Microsoft. We're actually not hating on you totally, but this is actually good news. So, Microsoft is disabling NTLM or making more progress towards disabling NTLM. So they've been pushing for developers to no longer use NTLM since 2010. So in case you forgot what year it is, that's 14 years ago. So this has been a very slow rolling discussion. So for 14 years, they've been saying like, hey, you should no longer use NTLM. However, they're moving a step further down in kind of forcing that, which is advising developers to replace the NTLM calls with a negotiate call, which will select the most secure available protocol, typically Kerberos, which is what most things use and should use out of the box. But again, we get back to that. What should out of the box configuration be, and where the onus is on that? Like that's a whole nother. That could be a whole talk by itself. Um, but the next major Windows and Windows Server release will be the last versions where NTLM is active by default. Now, those next major releases will be over the next few years, so it's not like the time frame is this year or probably even next year. But they're going from a like basically encouraging you to enable this function, which will select the most secure protocol. And then the next step will be disabling NTLM by default. And then once, and this is quote, once NTLM usage drops to an acceptably low level, whatever that is, Microsoft will disable it by default in a future release. So again, this kind of started, well over 14 years ago. Cool. Again, get that these things take a lot of time. There is, I still think, there's room for a lot of discussion in our field for how fast should software vendors, so OS or just a security vendor, a provider, an appliance, whatever, how fast they should force some things, because large organizations are never going to choose to reprioritize their work or take on extra work until they're forced to. So, I think there's room for a discussion for our field as far as like this conversation started well over 14 years ago. It's going to last at least, so we're probably talking like a 20-year thing here, right? To get NTLM out. And if you're not familiar, like NTLM is the next technology. Oh wow, see, I forgot what it stands for now. It's been around so long.
It's like
But I know
NT-LAN manager.
it's like new technology. It's the wording. The NT is kind of the very dated because it's like futuristic sounding. Anyway, yeah, but it's for password authentication, hashes, stuff like that. It's been weakened for ages. It's a great thing to come across if you need to get some credentials, because you can usually either do some replay attacks, or there's actually an assortment of ways to go from NTLM to successful authentication. So that's the reason why they're pushing back on that. But any thoughts or concerns either about this happening, the effects of it happening, or even the time frame that this conversation has been going on? No, we love it. We're fine
So
with it.
I never I'd never heard of this until recently. We were
Of
asked
NTLM?
to no,
Oh,
which is probably because I have never used a Windows machine in my life. But I think
fair.
I didn't even know what it was, but immediately could, like, within like 30 seconds of reading about it, could tell that it was really bad. So I guess my question for all of you is like, how did this fly for so long? Um,
It
especially
was great when it came out. It was better than what was before NTLM.
pigeons
Is NTLM or
carrying
my early
passwords.
days? It's probably it's probably FTP clear text. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. So NT stands for new technology. I knew it was some kind of weird name. So it's the expanded version is New Technology LAN Manager. So that already is kind of funny to talk about like 14 years later. Like, quit using the New Technology LAN Manager. Um, but yeah, I mean, at the time, like everything, looking back, it's gotten weakened by time and by new compute, faster compute, and all that. But um,
There's a little bit of background on it on the NTLM side.
yeah,
Working at Duo, had a lot of time in the auth space. So, I mean, I can tell you, I joined Duo in 2012, and most our implementations, when you're talking about authentication with Active Directory, were over NTLM. Kerberos is the recommended standard, that's more considered to be more secure. But I think generally speaking, it's more complicated to do and implement. So, and naturally, right, like you could just get NTLM working very easily and simply for authentication purposes. And so, if you look at it, it's like we're not only talking about just changing out a protocol, it's like anything that does authentication is either using NTLM or Kerberos, likely in a Windows environment, And unfortunately, that means configuration changes on all your authentication. So if you
Yeah.
built an app in house, but you know, if I recall, and it's been a while since I was really spending a lot of time on the authentication side, but like most your SSL VPNs were authenticating via NTLM. There's the option for Kerberos, but I remember consistently Citrix NetScalers, Pulse Secure VPNs, like all of that. Most of the primary authentication people would default to configuring it with NTLM. And so, you know, and then legacy systems, when you're talking about healthcare, manufacturing, you know, any of these things, like NTLM is pervasive.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
Mm-hmm.
the comment you mentioned, it's like it's nice that Microsoft's moving in this direction with deprecation, but the reality is like this stuff is going to persist for another decade or two, likely
Yeah.
in customers' environments. And I do want to emphasize, it's like there's really two things here. One is pruning, so it's like, yeah, ideally you get rid of as much of these bad protocols as possible. Like same thing, Emily, like RDP on the internet, like that's really bad. People still do it. I don't
Yeah.
know. But yeah, you need to go through and it's like really look at, hey, what things can we eliminate from leveraging and using NTLM and modernize? And then I think like the detection side, when I was at Blumira, a few things like having detections in place to like Kerberos is still susceptible to similar types of attacks, although harder to perform. So with NTLM, I think you're monitoring for patch the hash with detection tools. With
Mm-hmm.
Kerberos, there's Kerberosted,
Mm-hmm.
which is something that I think Amanda Berlin at Blumira wrote when I was there. So Kerberosting is the thing you have to look out for from a detection thing. And then there's another type of attack, ASREP. And I'm not a Windows administrator, so like just trying to do my best in communicating. Like you still have to be concerned about those things. And then with Kerberos, there's varying levels of encryption I think you can enable.
Mm-hmm.
So like guidance, I think, is actually to enable, you know, more secure forms of encryption even with Kerberos. So it's like this is a super complicated thing, but I think people are really happy that like Microsoft is finally acknowledging like NTLM needs to go, which hopefully then pushes all you know all these organizations to really start building projects to modernizing and leveraging Kerberos.
Yeah, and I have to assume that, like, again, from the large organization perspective, there's a lot of organizations that are going to want, like, they've definitely wanted to move away from these technologies or these protocols for a long time. But again, as things get interwoven, then dependencies happen, and then or in-house in-house apps are built, and it gets to a point to where you can't patch this thing or upgrade this protocol because the thing that runs this bottle packager or some one component of your entire like billion-dollar industry is running on this code that can't support it or whatever, and so you have to lowest common denominator basically across your org. And so there's it's really interesting. Like, I keep thinking about this. Like, I'd love to see maybe research into, like, what is the most forcing function for changes like this? Is it Windows saying no more, and then those third-party vendors are forced to become compatible or upgrade? Or is it, organizations in theory, would vote with their dollar and say, we can't renew or continue our contract because you don't support higher standard technology. But, I based on what we see and observe, I don't think that's what's happening. So, what is the way to force some of these old technologies out of the ecosystem that just persists forever and ever and ever? um I don't know. But we also see downgrade attacks, which will be, so let's mark it down, and within 2 years there'll be some kind of protocol downgrade attack for forcing down to NTLM. So as long as NTLM is available in some function, there's going to be attackers and actors who are looking for ways to get down to that, because then it's the easiest to crack or intercept.
This is a good case study actually in what you're saying, because like Microsoft since 2010 was saying don't use this.
Yeah.
Everyone's
Like,
still using it. So
yeah, like
like to me it's
until
like it actually needs to be the vendors that are eliminating insecure protocols, standards, and defaults. Like same thing with Snowflake and the MFA. Like I
so
would
then does
love
it
to
lie with the
see.
vendors or the like governmental regulation? Like, everyone wants
So
more regulations, but like
yeah,
vendors
regulation can
also are
help.
shareholders. Like, so yeah, the balance between federal regulations, privacy regulations, breach, breach, I don't want to say punishment, but like follow on regulations for when you have to pay ransomware, stuff like that. In my opinion, would go further than this wait and see model.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like there's really been any negative consequence to continuing to use it. Microsoft was like, hey, you should stop, but we're not going to really do anything. At least in my understanding of kind
Yeah.
of this situation, like they're not actually imposing any kind of
And we
punishment.
talk about cost of change, but also like Microsoft's been imposing the cost of maintaining this
Yeah.
for 25 years or whatever it is. So, but then also we get to have these fun conversations and these fun hypotheticals because our industry is still not that old, in compared to other things. So, we, I mean, Census knows, NT boxes are still out there and hanging out and doing critical things and showing their ransomware notices that no one's noticed. That's how
There's some
critical
really
these assets
old
are.
stuff. Yeah, it's really like nothing shocks me anymore. I don't know, Himija, if you feel the same way, but like I feel like at this point, I like we're all kind of so chronically online, and I feel like sort of desensitized to all of this bad stuff that just sort of floats around out there. But like, yeah, it's not great. Like it's really not. There's really a lot of old stuff that just needs
Yeah.
to go.
Well, we are coming up
Pruning. Oh,
on time.
sorry.
Yeah. What'd you say? What'd you say?
I said, I really think that we need to go through this phase of like pruning all this old
Yes.
dead
Mhm.
legacy technology.
Let's
And even looking at secure by defaults with
uh,
like the Snowflake stuff, right? It's like, wow, like people are overlooking this stuff even when there is regulation. Like these things are not binary. Like MFA might have been enabled on the SSO, might have not, might have been enabled, and continually, I think like people check the box that they are doing these things when in fact they might not even know that they're not. So I feel bad because it's not easy for the defender.
no.
And I certainly would say like pruning and then calling for like more secure by default configurations. Because when like in January, I audited 400 commercial accounts, and I think 150 of them didn't even have MFA as an option. Now that's not commercial, but like if that's what I found when I audited that in the consumer space,
Just
like
that sample
there's
size. Yeah.
yeah, we should go audit the commercial side and see is this the same way? And my guess is it's probably that not much different
Yeah.
from a security control perspective. So it's good.
So I think what we're saying is everyone should Marie Kondo their tech debt and their technologies and just thank it for its service and let it rest in peace. Get
I
rid of
love
it.
that. I love that.
I couldn't remember her name. I had to Google it real fast, but I could remember the condo part. So
Does
I
it
was just
spark
like,
joy? No.
yeah. Does this
End
does
of
this
life
technology
Windows machine
spark
spark
joy?
joy.
Get rid of it, man. All right, new sticker. Every episode, I come up with a sticker idea. I need a sticker fund. Um, awesome. Well, we are coming up on time. I don't know if anyone has any closing thoughts or last minute statements that they want to get out.
I have a closing thought.
Ooh,
Um,
you've been quiet,
so
so I'm scared.
it's always the quiet ones. I feel like we have Team Patrick and Team Emily, where not to make it a binary because it's not, but we have like this
Oh, okay.
idea of like uh
Emily just got nervous.
um we have this idea of like, okay, security resides with you, like the user. It is like you're the only one who will watch out for yourself. And then we also have like vendors really, like there is the responsibility on vendors too. I think here's my balanced take. I think combining those two, because I agree with both of them.
Mhm.
What the comments about NTLM have shown me are that like people do what is easy, right? Like
Mhm.
let's market to the lazy user, not to use that as an insult. I think we want to do the
Oh, yeah.
path of least
Pro
resistance.
lazy.
Efficient.
Yeah,
They're
pro
efficient.
lazy. Efficient. I love that word. Yeah, so what if like we had this kind of like partnership where vendors made like secure by design. So what if they made like it easy to be secure?
Mhm.
Even for the most efficient of users. And then we also have users like understand that that is also part of their responsibility. I think like for NTLM, I hope that it becomes harder to use, like
Yeah.
incrementally more inconvenient
UX
to
is
use.
huge.
Yeah,
Yeah. You
just
like
make it crumble.
make
Security is a
more.
UX problem,
Yeah,
right?
Yes.
Like at its core, how do we make this secure easy?
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely. I mean, that's one reason, like we talked about a lot about Duo today. Duo was very good about making MFA easy, right? And that was a way they got a lot of traction. And I mean, there's several technologies where you can look at or companies that weren't the first to do XYZ, but they were first to do it easily or aesthetically pleasing or whatever. And that's who gets the traction. So yeah, like I think that's a great coming together agreeable point.
We need both.
Yeah, we need
I
both.
agree 100%. I was just challenging Emily your position. I think like I agree 100%. Like there's onus on the users, and there's onus on the vendor. I just think I've seen this building security companies too long. Is vendors often give optionality that result in the end consumer shooting themselves in the foot, and it's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
tough to
no.
watch that happen. You know.
It's hard, and I entirely agree, right? Like I think it has to be both. And I think I'm coming at this from the perspective of somebody who's been responsible for
Yeah.
defending organizations, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to rely on anybody else to do it. I know it has
You
to.
should.
But I agree. Like it shouldn't be that way in an ideal world, right? Like there should be shared responsibility for the
For
tools
sure.
that we build and we buy, and
Just do the
yeah,
right
I
thing,
agree.
everyone.
Yeah.
Be a good
It's hard
It's
human.
so
sometimes.
easy.
Yeah. Well, great. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today. You can find Patrick on all the socials, and check out Vulncheck. They're pretty cool. Big fans. And Emily Imija, thank you joining us from Census as usual. Thank you for that. And we will sign off and see you next Tuesday.
It's been
Bye, everyone.
fun.
Awesome. See ya.